What is psychology? How do psychologists study the mind? And what are the most important experiments in the history of psychology? These are questions that Daniel Edward has been asking and answering on his popular YouTube channel, Psychology Unlocked. I first came across this channel a few months ago, and I was instantly hooked by Daniel's clear presentation and his passion for understanding the mind and the field of psychology. In this interview, we discuss a range of topics in psychology as well as Daniel's background. Daniel Edwards studied psychology at the University of Cambridge in the UK before working internationally as a presenter and writer. Grateful for the opportunity to study psychology at such an inspiring university, Daniel set up Psychology Unlocked to share his passion for the subject with the next generation of students. So without further ado, I give you my interview with Daniel Edward. Maybe before we begin, you can just give everybody a little bit of your background and why you're interested in psychology, why you started the channel and all that.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Daniel from London, and I started Psychology Unlocked in 2016. My interest in psychology, though, started quite a few years before that. I'd say 2008, 2009, something along those lines. And it was when I started to look at which universities I wanted to go to, and sort of get into where do I want to study, what do I want to study in more depth. And I've never studied psychology before. It's not really a common thing to study at high school in the UK. It's becoming more so now, but at the time it wasn't. But it was something that my school offered in the final 2 years at A levels, final 2 years of school. And so it was this big decision of, do I take a brand new subject that I've never studied before, and try and use that subject to go to university? And so I thought, yes, I'm going to do that. I wanted to learn about how people worked, how groups worked. I was really interested, in particular at that time, about autism and about sort of neurodevelopmental issues. I'd been volunteering at a residential school for students with quite severe physical and mental disabilities. This had been through a sort of a volunteering charity thing through school, and I found it very interesting, and it opened so many questions for me. The main one that I remember having at the time was, do the children that I'm meeting at this school know that they've got a disability? Because somebody who is totally normal, for want of a better word, mentally, and has broken their leg, knows that they've broken their leg, knows that their leg isn't quite working as a leg is sort of designed to work. But does somebody with a psychological disability know? Because it's the brain that processes what's going on. And I was fascinated by that question. I can't say that I came to an answer or have yet come to an answer on it, but that was the sort of initial question that got me interested in psychology. And then through studying at university, took it even further. And out of university, and then I'll stop telling you my life story. I stopped studying psychology and went into a totally different line of work as a presenter and as a writer. And that was why I set up the channel, because I thought, I've learned so much over the time that I've studied it, and I've loved it so much. What a waste if I just drop it. I can't just drop it. I need to do something with it. And so that's where Psychology Unlocked sort of emerged from that.
That's so interesting. So two questions on that. Did you, it seems like the original intention, or maybe still the intention of the channel, is to, and kind of in the website behind it, is to have a free free psychology textbook available, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the real driving force behind Psychology Unlocked, as you say, is the YouTube channel, but also as the website, is to provide an online free textbook that sort of breaks down the complex stuff in psychology for students who are just starting to tackle it, and sort of dishes it up in a way which is hopefully fun and hopefully understandable. Because I really remember times when I was a student where I'd start studying something and I'd be like, oh, I don't get this. This is weird. I'm not getting this at all. And then suddenly there's that moment where somebody just rephrases it for you in a certain way, and it all makes perfect sense, and it's all just there. And then once you've understood the basics of it, you can do something with it. And yeah, as you can see, I love books. So I was never going to be short of books because I happen to love them. But I appreciated that textbooks aren't for everyone, and also they're expensive. Most of my textbooks, which I've still got because they're still really useful, most of them are really old and secondhand, because at £50 a book or something, it's just extortionate. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to provide something which cost nothing, and provided an up-to-date, valuable resource for students who are just getting into it now.
Love that. I love that. And I have to say, I've never felt the confusion that you described when I'm watching your videos. You have a really, really clear, just really enjoyable way of describing the concepts. And I want to get into that a little bit, have you explain some of these concepts. But I'm just curious, what is your job now? What do you do now?
So now I'm a presenter and a writer. So I do travel writing, which nothing to do with psychology, and entertainment presenting. So again, nothing directly to do with psychology. So I would say that any job which involves people and communicating and connecting benefits from an understanding of psychology. One of the things which I think is probably the most important thing when it comes to connecting, and when you're in a room entertaining people on stage or through a screen, you've got a person sort of seeing a person. But when you're entertaining and connecting through writing, you've already taken one person out of the equation. And so being really conscious of the ways that people connect actually helps make your work better in that sense. And one of the areas within psychology which helps with that is about how people code memories. Mm-hmm. People use all of their senses to create a memory and then to relate that memory back at another point in time. And if in your writing you're able to give them all of these different cues, then they'll remember what you wrote. They'll remember how you made them feel in that piece. I think I mentioned it in one of my videos. I can't remember which one, probably a memory one, given that I can't remember. And it's a quote from Maya Angelou, which I just think is so right, which is that people don't remember, exactly what you said. They don't remember exactly what you did, but they'll remember exactly how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And it's tapping into these different ways of coding something. And any job which connects with people benefits from some knowledge of psychology.
Oh yeah, I agree. That's really cool. I love that. All right, well, let's see if we can get some people to remember some psychology here.
Let's see if I can.
Well, I think one of my favorite ways to learn about any topic is to kind of talk a little bit about the history. And that's something that you've touched on your channel. And so I thought we could just kind of talk about, how did psychology begin as a field? Because a lot of people don't even really realize that it is a science, or that it wasn't always a science. So maybe I'll let you take that.
Well, there's still this discussion: is psychology a science? And there will be people who really stand firm. No, it's not a science. That no. And to be fair, there are parts of psychology which don't look so much like science, but underlying it is a scientific method. Therefore, it's scientific, even if you don't want to call it a hard science. But as with all sciences, it really came from philosophy, and philosophy came from art. It's all about thinking and thought experiments, which then lead to real experiments, which then lead to something which sort of neatens itself into a discipline which gets pigeonholed. In a way, for me, I wish we weren't pigeonholing things into psychology, biology, physics, chemistry. Doesn't make sense. There's this, this very brief period in history, in academic history at least, where people embrace the idea of being an all-rounder, a multidisciplinarian, and that must have just been the most liberating time to be involved in experimentation and thought development, because you weren't boxed into an area. I'm thinking about people like Marx and Weber. They are massive names, and we now try and pigeonhole them into, oh, well, they were a sociologist or they were a political theorist. Well, no, they weren't. If you look at Weber, yes, he was a sociologist. He was also a musician. He was a music critic. He was all sorts of things, because he saw that all of these different things sort of pieced together to be this sort of important web of what it meant to be human. And I think that's what psychology does. I think we are now seeing this development of a professionalized discipline, which has then compartmentalized itself. I think we are seeing some sort of threads weaving back across to tie things together. But as a discipline, psychology wasn't set up. Nobody sat down and said, do you know what? Today, I'm going to start psychology. It just didn't happen like that. But the historians write it like that, which I think is very interesting as an idea of history. History is constructed. It's constructed after the fact. And you sort of work your way back and you go, that must have been the moment. That must have been when things happened. And William James is a big name where they say that was a moment, that was when things happened. But William James wasn't sitting there going,
Yes.
That's just not how people work. People don't know when they've made this huge eureka moment until it's happened. But then there are definitely key names in the journey of psychology becoming psychology as we know it today. And there's, Freud has to be a name that gets mentioned. And very few psychologists of today would very closely associate with Freud. He's a sort of pseudoscientist in a way, but influential. You can't separate out the fact that today's psychology has a lot to thank Freud for, if for nothing else, for noticing the flaws of his work. Most of the time, psychologists of every generation, and it's only been going for 150, 200 years as a formal discipline, but the questions have been very stable throughout. People want to know, what is it that makes a human a human? What is it that makes somebody go wrong? And what is it that makes somebody go right? These are the ultimate questions that sort of psychology tackles. And then there are nuances within that. But psychology more recently has sort of played tag team with social developments. And I think the biggest one was the rise of the computer. So the computer age transformed psychology in two main ways, I think. The first was that it transformed the way we think about people. Suddenly we were thinking about people as processing power. We were thinking about people as biological computers, which is the weirdest role reversal that you can imagine, because it's almost as if saying computers are the natural being and we're just a sort of a gooier version of them. Well, no, it should be the other way around. And we're now seeing it the other way around in terms of artificial intelligence is now the re-reversal of what I see cognitive psychology originally sort of setting out to mold humans into a model of a computer. And so that was one way that sort of cognitive psychology really changed with the societal developments of computing power. The other thing that massively changed was computing power giving us the ability to look inside somebody's brain.
Mhm.
And that, as a tool, has given us more than I think any other development in the last 200 years has given us. Because it used to be the case that in order to see someone's brain, they had to be dead. There was no other way around that. That you're not going to watch somebody's brain working. You just get the form, and the form doesn't tell you very much. Whereas we can actually watch people's brains now without having to do without drilling, without opening up. It's baffling. And that side of technology then led to neuroscience and sort of huge developments in a slightly more biological way. And that's sort of, to bring that back, I see that as sort of those weaving back together. Maybe in another 50 years, we'll be back at that Renaissance man where you draw out these bits of everything that you like and turn into this sort of all-rounder again. That would be a dream.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great overview of that. And just on your point about, the brain being influenced, or our ideas about the brain being influenced by computers. I recently read that John von Neumann, the inventor of the modern computer architecture, was originally inspired by the architecture of the brain. So there's kind of a strange interweaving going on there too. And in the early history of neuroscience, I think your point about there being these Renaissance men also holds there. There was just a lot of people who were doing, they were physicists, but also physiologists. And I wonder if early in a field, if that's common, where you have just people from all sorts of different disciplines coming together and mixing them. And so on that point of how psychology developed over time, I think a very interesting thread in the history of psychology is kind of behaviorism, and how that arose, and then how that changed in the cognitive revolution, as you were kind of alluding to before.
Behaviorism came out with this idea that everything that was important could be seen. I think one of the important things with this is that at that point, that was the only way you could see things. It wasn't necessarily that if they'd had alternatives, they wouldn't have considered them. They didn't have the alternatives. And therefore, the only way really to study what was going on inside was to understand the external expression of it, which is a behavior. And so there was this leaning towards what I see is what I get. What I see shows me what's inside. And it was one directional. We now understand that actually it's not quite as simple as that. Behaviors certainly show us something, but they don't necessarily show us everything. And it's definitely not one directional. And this is something that the behaviorists didn't quite get at that point in time. A key criticism of it was how reductionist it was. It totally reduced people to a few behaviors that they were performing, and it didn't give the nuance of the fact that on a Tuesday morning you might feel this way, on a Wednesday afternoon you're going to be totally different. When you're with Mary and John, you're going to be doing this thing, but when you're with Stuart and Steve, you're going to do totally different. It didn't really go into those nuances, and that probably the quote that best sums up behaviorism is from Watson, and it's the quote about give me, I think he said a dozen or half dozen, I can't remember, give me a dozen or half dozen healthy children and infant children, and I will turn them into anything I want. Whether that's a banker, a lawyer, a teacher, a robber, a criminal. He said, I could turn them into anything so long as I can control their environment. So long as I can control everything that's external to that person, I can turn them into anything. And there's probably something to that. I don't think most psychologists would say he was totally wrong. but he definitely wasn't totally right. The environment is hugely influential, and there are definitely external stimuli and factors which for sure influence our development, influence how we think, how we walk, how we talk, how we behave. For sure they do. But it takes, the behaviorist approach takes away the fact that this person also has an effect on the environment. And we sort of forget sometimes that everything around us, we decided that it was going to be there, particularly in a built environment. If you go into the middle of a field, you didn't control that the field was there, but you did control that you went to that field. In a house, you choose your own decorations. You frame your own stage, and that then influences you in return. But don't forget that you created it. It's a symbiotic relationship, and that was what behaviorism sort of didn't get. And then cognitive psychology, I feel, went too much the other way, which was to say, no, it's all the computer in your head. And it, for a while, it forgot about the fact that that computer in your head is processing information from an environment that's around us that computer in your head also created. And then we get into the sort of like fast forward another 50 years to sort of touching now with the neuroscience of saying, well, actually, none of it exists anyway. It's all now a creation inside your head of a perception, because what we see isn't what's actually in front of us. It's what our brain has now recomputed to be what's in front of us. But throughout all of these sort of developing strands, I think the most important thing for us all to remember is that no single strand is correct. That's why I love psychology so much. No single discipline in psychology is correct. It doesn't work that way. The ideas sort of form together as a package that can then be unfolded, and the depth and the nuance then reveals itself. It's why I love the sort of the overlaps between cognitive and social, or social and developmental, or developmental psychology could mean anything, because at every point in our life we're developing. We're always 1 second older than the second before. So everything's developmental psychology. It's just an angle. And the same with cognitive, the same with biological, the same with forensic. That everything is an angle. And I think at the root of it, they do try and tackle the same questions, and they all need each other. It makes me think in a way, I don't know if you've ever seen this or tried it in like a summer camp or something, where you're all in a circle and you all try and sit down onto the lap of the person behind you in the circle.
Yes, yeah.
And if everybody does it, then the circle is sort of self-supporting. Nobody needs a chair. But if it goes wrong, it falls in. And there have been times coming out of behaviorism into cognitive, there was a clash. They didn't support each other. So behaviorism was sort of knocked out. There was a time coming out of cognitive into social, knocked out. It was out of fashion, but they come back in. And it's at the point that they come back in that they lift each other up.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because I think that also rings true with like behavioral genetics. I think there was a point when it was kind of dominating the thinking of many psychologists, and then it went away. It was really controversial, and now I think in the last 10 or 15 years it has come back with new methods, and it's more accepted and less I guess less stigmatized, you might say.
I think with that, it's also the case that when something new starts, it's extreme, and people are nervous of extremes, and also the extreme is less likely to be so accurate. But if it's not extreme, it's not going to get noticed. It's minority influence in a way, and it's just that tipping point of when does it become acceptable again, and when does it when is it safe to be less extreme? In a really odd example that maybe only British viewers are going to get, I'm not sure. Is Graham Norton a known name in America?
I don't personally can't picture him, but I've heard the name many times. So
Okay, so he's an entertainment presenter in the UK. He's popular in the UK, and he does the Graham Norton Show, which is a sort of a late night chat show, bit of comedy. But when he started, he used to wear the most loud, gregarious, flamboyant shirts you've ever seen. Like, they were in your face because he needed to be in your face to make a splash, to get noticed, to be anyone. And for a while, he was Graham Norton who wears the funny clothes. Now, he doesn't wear those clothes anymore because he doesn't need to. He's still Graham Norton. He's just less extreme because people have accepted him. And I think it's the same with sort of new focuses within the sort of the overarching discipline. People need to make some noise at the beginning to sort of shock some people into noticing them. But nobody keeps their shock value forever.
yes, yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. Well, all right. So we've talked a little bit about the development of psychology over time, and I thought it'd be interesting to just cover some of these, some concepts in psychology, some that, prominent ones that you hear about, like intelligence. So I thought we could just discuss what is intelligence and maybe some of the theories around what it is. So I'll let you take that, and we can bounce back and forth on that.
Yeah, well, this is a huge question, and I love it in that this is an area where I think we've seen a massive sort of move forward that's opened things up. It used to be the fact, what was intelligence? It's your score on an IQ test, an intelligence quotient test. I mean, what even is this? It's a laboratory made piece of paper that's supposed to tell us how clever we are. Well, is intelligence even cleverness? For a long time, it was. That was what people wanted it to be. We've definitely moved away from that now. And from my reading, I much prefer the idea of intelligences. It sounds grammatically horrible, but the idea of having multiple intelligences makes so much more sense. And it changes our line of thinking from this elitism of, well, if you do well in a particular type of test, you're cognitively better than somebody who doesn't do so well in that type of test. And it reflects the fact that actually people are good at different things, and each different thing requires some cognitive skill set. And so now there are various lines of intelligences. There's kinetic intelligence. Sports stars on the pitch clearly have something going on in there. They really know their space. They understand where other people are. They can see the gaps on a field to play into a gap that nobody else has seen because they're looking at the person. Well, there's intelligence in that. It's not academic. You wouldn't ask a football star to write an essay about their work, right, but they can demonstrate it to you, and it's their brain that's controlling that body. There's intelligence in that. Same with a dancer. That level of physical control doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from your brain, and your brain, to be crude, is intelligent. That's where your cognitive control is. Then, of course, there's your sort of traditional knowledge-based intelligence, the ability to retain facts, the ability to communicate those facts somewhat clearly in a coherent form. Then there's that sort of abstract and logic type of intelligence, algebra. Somebody who's wildly intelligent in terms of their literary criticism might be hideously awful when it comes to complex mathematical tasks. Both of those challenges require somebody to be intelligent. You're not going to be all things all the time. The final example of intelligence that I think is worth drawing out, and this isn't an exhaustive list, there are loads of different ones, some more mainstream than others, but one which has garnered a lot of attention over the last decade at least is emotional intelligence. And this is something which, in the sort of the modern world of human resources within the workplace, this is the intelligence that people are really working out. How do we champion it? How do we recognize it? How do we teach it? Because people who are emotionally intelligent get more out of other people. Therefore, companies care about that because they make more money, because their people are more productive. And this is something which, for anyone watching this who's thinking, where do you make money in psychology? Where's the money in this business? It's in occupational, organizational psychology. If you can use your knowledge of people to make companies more money, they'll pay you for it. And there's huge work going into it. And emotional intelligence is one of those lines of work. It has led to this huge shift in thinking. There's always been that little bit of, for example, in journalism, in the media, there's always been, it's not what you know, it's who you know. If you unpack that one layer down, how do you get to the it's who you know part? You have to be good with people. The people who are good with people tend to be good with their emotional intelligence. They understand people and therefore can use that to build relationships to then get what they want later down the line. It's not that they knew things. They weren't useful to people in a knowledge way. They were useful to people in a person-to-person, heart-to-heart connected way. And that is intelligence as much as achieving a great score on your IQ test is.
Right. Yeah. And I like the idea of multiple intelligences, but sometimes I wonder if it isn't confusing the issue a little bit. And what I mean by that is, I wonder if intelligence could be defined as something simple, like not as mathematical ability or even as IQ, but as something like general problem solving ability or reasoning ability or something like that. And maybe reasoning isn't the best way to think of it, but problem solving. And I'm not a theorist, and I haven't done my research to really back this up. But I wonder if the word intelligence is almost charged in a way that if you say, oh, somebody's more intelligent than you, it's a much bigger blow than saying that person's more athletic than you. And whereas I don't know exactly why that is, and maybe it's just humans are sensitive about our cognitive abilities or something. But I wonder, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's so personal. There are so many insults, certainly in the English language, which focus on how stupid some people are. There are so many names that people are called that attacks them at their intellect. I think there's a case for. I like your thought on problem solving, and I don't think that's incompatible with the multiple intelligences either. Because thinking about the footballer on the pitch, they're solving a problem. Their problem is, how do I get this ball to where I need it to get to using the resources around me, which happen to be other players, and considering the obstacles around me, which happen to be opponents. That's still a problem to be solved. And quite possibly, I'm no mathematician, but quite possibly there would be a real maths whiz kid who would be able to mathematically write out that equation of person A is in position X, Y, Z, and then option B, C, and an F there, and there's probably a way of playing that exact game in probabilities, in chance, and as a strategy game, because it's just a strategy game done through your legs and a bit of path. So yeah, I totally buy that sort of idea of intelligence might boil down to your ability to problem solve, but every problem is a different problem, and therefore some people are going to be better at solving, different types of problems. But I think that the thing that you said, which resonates most with me, is about how personal our intelligence is to us, much more so than our physical abilities. And I think the point in our life where this becomes most apparent is in old age. And the way people talk about old people, they'll say things like, oh, he's slower than he was before, but he's all there. So that's the all there. That's all. You could chop off his body from there down and he's still got it all. Really?
Right.
But that's how he's still got all of his faculties. All of his faculties, he can't walk anymore. No, all of his faculties. So there's definitely something where we hold on to this special part of our body, which is our brain. I think that's what makes us feel special. If we look around the animal kingdom, every animal has a brain. Well, that's not quite true. Most animals have a brain. They're not as good as ours for some reason. They're very good at helping them be a lion, or helping them be a monkey, or helping them be a snake. But they haven't done some magic jump that turned it into a human brain. And the odd thing about that is I'm not talking down the power of a human brain, because it's astonishing. But the reason we can talk isn't just because of our human brain. It's because of the structure of our human mouth. It's because of the position of our human voice box. It's all of these things are key to our ability to talk. Our ability to talk would be nothing if we didn't also have the ability to hear and listen. Well, they're physical ears, these things. And other animals' ears are shaped in different ways. We don't really put it all down to the physicality. We credit all of the great stuff to something going on in there. And that's where it's all happening. It is and it isn't. We work within an entire body, in an entire system of social structure. And it's, for me, it's much more convincing to try and see it as this sort of big whole, rather than this compartmentalized brain does this bit does that. They've got to work together.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. A lot of emphasis on the brain, and on and even when you get into the brain, on maybe even on the cortex in particular, and just ignoring these other brain regions. And no, yeah, your point is taken there. Well, maybe we can move on from intelligence a little bit and talk about memory, as you were talking about a little bit earlier. So I thought we could just talk about the general idea of what is memory, how does it work, how does psychologists think about memory?
Memory is many things, like intelligence. It's multiple, which is, again, this is something which I love about psychology. There's, unfortunately and fortunately, there's never a simple answer, which I love. But memory is multiple things. Memory is an object. Memory is a noun. Memory is a verb. We remember something using our memory, so it's a system, and we, through that system, pick up a memory, which is an object. So there are many things which we refer to in sort of day-to-day conversation as memory. Our ability to have this conversation right now is using our memory. People don't think of the skill of having a conversation is actually a skill of memory. We're having to remember the words that we want to say. So that sort of immediate sentence, what have I already said in this sentence, and what do I need to say in order to complete it? So we're remembering a thought. We've then got to remember the words that we learned when we were 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 that are going to be useful to formulating that sentence. Then we have to remember what the person we're talking to is likely to already know about what we're saying, in order to not say superfluous stuff, not to be patronizing, or not to go too far and lose the actual connection of communication. So memory is involved in that. Memory is also involved in physical activities like riding a bike. You learn it and then you do it, but the doing it is relying on a memory. But that's not a memory that you can speak about. You can't speak the ability to ride a bike. You can only do the ability. And that's still a form of memory. Remembering facts, which I have to say is something that I'm no good at. It's really odd. Yeah, my channel, I'm obviously trying to convey things accurately and correctly, so I don't rely on my memory at all. Every single video I write, I go back to the book, even if I think I know something. The very worst thing when it comes to memory is thinking you know something.
Yes.
If you are convinced, I know this, you probably don't. And that's the weirdest thing about our memory, because we can't possibly know everything. And I think most people have a sort of an acceptance that we don't know everything. But we have to sort of trick ourselves into thinking that we know a little bit more than we do, because there are too many gaps, and that would lead us sort of nowhere. We'd be constantly fumbling around trying to work out, oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on because there are too many gaps in my knowledge, in my memory. So we use schemas and other sort of cognitive tools to bridge some gaps so we don't notice that they're there, which is wonderful. The only issue is when you get caught.
That's right. Yeah. And I want to return to false memories and all that in a moment, but you just mentioned schemas. And I thought that's a great concept for people to understand, a psychological concept. So maybe you can explain that.
So a schema it's a cognitive shortcut. So we have schemas for, arguably, if you go with the cognitive line on it, you have schemas for everything that you do in life. You have a schema about things and a schema for doing things. One of the first schemas that an infant will develop is the schema of reaching out and grabbing something. That's a sort of a learned generic behavior that they can fit specifics into. I see something, I can reach it and I can grab it. As we grow up, we develop schemas in more of a way that, in sort of non-psychological speak, we might call stereotypes and prejudicing. We don't need to know every single person of a certain description. We've come up with a general stereotype for them, and so long as we don't get too close with that person to challenge that schema, it will just keep going. If we get close enough with somebody who sort of fits within that general schema but is different from it, that can then educate our schema, which is why, in terms of some of the challenges within society of prejudice and stereotyping, some of the best ways to break down those walls is to get people to meet, get people to spend that time together, because it uses that cognitive structure which you will rely on, and it uses it positively. They're still going to have a schema. We're never getting rid of schemas. If you buy the argument that there are schemas, you're never going to get rid of them, because they are the tools with which we use to get about our day-to-day life. But you can inform your schemas and make them more true to life, more accurate, more useful. So I'm gonna try and keep this sort of abstract rather than go with a specific sort of group of people. But if your schema as you grow up is that I'll go with redheads. All redheads wear blue shoes. Every redhead that you meet that wears blue shoes is gonna encourage you to believe in that schema. As soon as you meet one redhead who wears red shoes, that schema doesn't quite work for you anymore. And now you've got that option of, really, it's cognitive dissonance. What do you now do? And your schema then develops with this new information involved. Either you look at the redhead with the red shoes, and you go, actually, that redhead is also a jazz singer, and jazz singers always wear red shoes. So now you sort of said, okay, well, I now understand that, you know, redheads can also be jazz singers, but the jazz singer is a stronger identity. Yeah, your schemas then sort of write that story and you shortcut for yourself. But the reason for them existing, besides silly examples like that, the reason for them existing is that we would exhaust ourselves if we didn't have them. We have only a finite cognitive resource, and then we have to go to sleep. We have to eat, we have to sleep. We got to recharge the batteries. And if we had to notice everything, if we had to reconsider everything from scratch every time, there'd be no time in the day, but also the computing power, to use that analogy, would totally wipe out our brain. We just don't have that amount of power, processing power, to get those computations done every millisecond of every day. It would be an impossibility, and we'd all be having mental breakdowns. And it would be a case of computer says no throughout the day, every day. People could argue that schemas make us lazy. We're taking shortcuts. I wouldn't go with that line. I'd say schemas are probably one of those cognitive tools that demonstrate how remarkably intelligent we are. And this isn't, you know, this isn't academic intelligence. This is every single person. Everyone is using this tool and achieving more with it than they would ever be able to do without it, even though it makes us wrong.
Yes, yeah, and it's I think more and more in like neuroscience, in popular accounts of neuroscience, they're talking about predictions and all the way that the brain is constantly predicting the outcome of an action or what it's likely to see in the next moment. And I wonder if these schemas are just elaborated versions of these predictions in specific domains. And so, you know, you're based on somebody's hair color or their if they're a jazz musician, you are using that one data point to make a prediction about that entire person. But yeah, your point about them being necessary and yeah, they make us wrong sometimes, but they're also incredibly useful. It's just we have to learn to tweak them and change them when new evidence comes in.
Yeah, and another thing along that line is, I wonder if you ever noticed that you're different with different people, and there are certain people in your friendship group or in your sort of wider network that you might feel very uncomfortable about seeing at the same time, because they draw on very different parts of your identities. And so it can put you in a very uncomfortable position of not knowing how to be in both of their presence at the same time, because you're relying on different schemas, different shortcuts, different identities, group memberships, and no person is one thing. And yet we try and reduce people and reduce situations to those one thing moments in order to help us make sense of them.
Yes. And I think sometimes it's funny. Sometimes you bring all those people together and your worst fears come true. It was just a horrible disaster. But sometimes it's you bring them together and it's fine. And you were wrong. Your schema for each of those was maybe off by a little bit, and you don't have to feel so tense anymore. But it's always an experiment, I guess. Okay, so that's great explanation of schemas. Maybe we can return to false memories for a little bit, and then I have some broader questions that if you're good with it, kind of some little bit more philosophical questions I like to ask people. But yeah, so maybe we can talk about this idea of false memory and how do we know that people can form false memories? Yeah, I'll let you take that.
So one of the clearest ways of knowing that people are able to have these false memories and believe them comes from laboratory studies. Experiments looking at memory have returned false memory. And so it's through that research that it's been like, whoa, these people really think that they're telling the truth. They're not trying to deceive anyone. They've just got it wrong. And they don't know that they've got it wrong. And in fact, when you go back and re-interview them a week down the line, they've got it even more wrong because they're now rewriting their story and they don't know truth from reality. No, that is the same. Truth from not reality, whatever that would be. And in the real world, it doesn't really matter, which is the oddest thing. Generally speaking, day to day, what difference if we've got something not quite right? And there are often, family arguments where somebody will say, do you remember that time when and somebody will say, you weren't there. I said, no, I was there. I remember it. They don't necessarily remember it. They remember being told it and they've rewritten their story that they happen to be there. And it happens all the time. One of the odd things that I sort of referred to earlier was that the research has shown that the more sure somebody is that they remember something, the less likely it is that it actually happened. And that's bizarre. But perhaps that's a defensive mechanism within our brain, that when there's a gap, that we're sort of trying to put that patch over it. That patch is so strong, so tough, and so resistant to challenge, because something in our brain knows that if we get through that patch, there's a big gaping hole, and it's trying to protect us from falling down that hole and realizing that that we've fooled ourselves, which would be an uncomfortable position to be in. So perhaps it's a defensive mechanism. But there are certain situations where actually it's really important that we know if something's real or not real. People have been sent to death row based on eyewitness testimony that turned out to be false, which is, people were sentenced to death because somebody else misremembered something but swore an oath on it. And that has huge implications. It's ruined people's lives. It's not just ruined that one person's life, but family around them. They thought they knew that person, and now they're being told that this person has done something so heinous that they're being sentenced to death row. But I thought I knew you. Well, they did. That person was innocent, all because somebody misremembered something. There are other times where it's totally trivial. One thing that I think possibly a lot of people watching my channel care about, because a lot of them are students, is, well, what about exams? Exams are very unfair. Exams, they show a certain type of intelligence, fair enough, that's what they were designed to show. But it's a memory test, and it's a memory test of the weirdest kind, because it's totally out of any context. You don't know what question you're going to be asked as you develop up through sort of the higher levels. You're going to get a wider question that you then have to piece in what you know to it. But if you're anything like me, you had your set pieces that you knew, okay, I'm going to have to try and shoehorn that in. I've got to find a way of saying this, because you can't possibly remember every study that you've ever come across. And so you then turn everything into an exhibition of the few things that you do know, which means that you're exaggerating those things that you've remembered and dismissing those things that you know that you haven't quite remembered. I much prefer the idea, I don't know if this is going to catch on in the educational world, but I much prefer the idea of open book exams. Knowing where to look for the information, in my opinion, is so much more important than knowing the information off the top of your head. Because when in the real world do you need to know everything off the top of your head? Much better, as I said with every one of my videos, I go back to the book, because I know it's not in there. I know, so in my case, I know that I know enough to know where to look. And I know that I understand it enough to comprehend it when I read it again. which means I can then sort of rewrite it in a way that hopefully makes it clearer for somebody approaching it for the first time. But I also understand, possibly because I've studied memory, that if I tried to just sit down and write it, I'd get it 80% right, but I'd get one astoundingly wrong thing right in the middle there. And I wouldn't even notice it. And it's happened. It's happened before for me when I was talking with some of my peers who I studied with. And this was a few years after we'd graduated. And for some reason, Ash's line study came up.
Solomon Asch.
Yeah. And I said something along the lines of, yeah, and I mean, with the line study, all they were being asked to do is say which line's the longest. And somebody else said, that isn't what they were asked to do at all. Yeah, it was. Of course it was. Well, I went back to it. It wasn't. They were being asked to say which line is the same length as that line. Nobody cared which line was the longest. For some reason, I'd written into my memory which line is the longest. And I was convinced that I was right, which meant that I was wrong. It's a really odd thing. But I do always go back to the point that, generally speaking, it doesn't matter. We don't have to be right all the time. And our brain protects us from that. It doesn't need to always be right. It needs to be almost right. It needs to be convincing.
Right.
And the only person it needs to be convincing for is ourselves. Because everybody else's brain is doing it for them.
Right. Yeah. This thought came up when you were talking about open book exams. And I think you could be right there. I had a professor in college who, for an upper level immunology course, had us take a open book exam. And I can say that was the hardest, at least one of the hardest exams I've ever taken, because it wasn't like memorizing and what's this and how does this work. It was like taking all those concepts and then having you reason through something that was much more complicated. So it was more that problem solving rather than just simply the memory retrieval. So and as far as false memories and them being a defense mechanism, that's a very interesting idea. I've never considered it from that perspective before, but I've always just thought of it as, well, we're this biological system that, as you said, we don't have to be perfectly right, and we just sort of try to piece things together into our schemas, and we're not going to have perfect information retention, and so these false memories are bound to pop up. But that defense idea, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think we're all about self-preservation in a way, and psychology over the years has definitely had a negativity bias. And we always look at things going wrong, and false memories could so easily be another one of those, oh, here we go again, we've gone wrong, we're broken. Since the 1990s, there has been more of a sort of a shift, if not a real shunt across to positive psychology. And everything that's negative could also be positive. It's all about angles. And taking that positive angle actually opens up a few more options and questions. The reason I try and angle things as much as I can from the positive comes down to some research that I was reading about people who thrive. And it's optimism, it's hopefulness, it's those traits which lead people to not be average, not be normal, not be doing okay, but to be better. And actually, little things like a false memory, for those people, they'll still have false memories, but they have good false memories. So I like to always try and think about the alternative way of reframing certain things. It brings it back to my love of psychology, is that there's no single right answer, or at least there isn't one yet. It's a subject where you can still play with it. I love that.
Oh, that's great. I love that too. All right. Well, let's if you're all right with it, I'd kind of like to
Give it a
open
go.
it up to these broader questions. So the first one, I think we've covered this a little bit, but most of my guests tend to be people in the neurosciences doing some kind of research or just communicating. And so I often ask them to answer this ridiculous question of just how the brain works, just to give me a sort of elevator pitch, short form answer. But maybe for you, I'd like to ask something equally simple, which is, what is the mind, or how does the mind work?
Ooh. I think the mind, and I love that you've distinguished this from the brain already, because I think it is separate from the brain. I think the mind is what happens when all of those neurons fire and create something a level beyond. It's that holographic piece that you can't really touch. It doesn't exist. It's not there. And yet we believe it is there. It's this totally convincing inner world that is the outside world internalized, and it's our internal world externalized. It's a sort of, in a very abstract way, it's this mesh that connects us with everybody else without touching them. We are thousands and thousands of miles away, and yet through my mind connecting in some weird way with your mind, I'm able to sort of get how we're going with this conversation. I'm able to sort of get whether I'm saying something which is making sense to you or not making sense to you, whether I'm saying something that is interesting or not interesting, whether I should continue talking, whether I should stop talking. It's amazing, because we've never met, and this is a screen.
Yes.
And yet both of us understand that we're not talking to a screen. We're talking to another real person who right now is just a load of pixels on a screen. Our brains aren't connecting. It's something metaphysical. And I think that is the mind. I think it's a very difficult thing to pin down.
Yeah, well, that's a good elevator pitch answer to that. All right. Well, now for another easy one. I ask everybody this now. What's your view of free will?
I think it exists. I don't think it's entirely free. We all have choices throughout life. Every individual choice is a free choice, but every choice then binds us for the next choice. It chooses the path that we're likely to go on. I believe that you can always change the path, even at quite a ripe old age. There's always opportunities for change, but it gets more difficult. And I base that on sort of neuroscience stuff rather than your traditional psychology. And it's that neurons that fire together wire together. The more you do something, the more your brain is already ready to do that thing. If it's ready to do that thing, is that free will? Well, it is, because you chose to do that thing initially and you chose to repeat and practice it. Is it as free now as the first time you did it? I don't think it is. Make your bed and lie in it, or whatever that phrase is. But if you do decide, do you know what? No, I'm going to change path. I've lived a life of X and I want to now do Y. I think Y is achievable, but switching across is going to be difficult. And I think that's the moment where people really test their free will. But what are they testing? I think they're testing their cognitive resources. Mm-hmm. They're testing their ability to reapply their energies to something that's not as easy. Water will always find the easiest path, the path of least resistance. So will human behaviors. Mm. But it's all rooted in a decision that we made, with one tiny caveat, that our very first decisions weren't entirely ours either. And I don't think we should ever completely discount the fact that we live in a social world with other people. And at different points in our lives, we are not independent of those other factors. As a child, it's maybe our parents, it's our siblings as we go into sort of that tween period of sort of preteen, and then we've got into adolescence, it becomes our peers, and we've suddenly got, you go off into different groups that your parents might not be very pleased about. Well, tough, because that's not where the influence is coming from then. And then as you go through, you come out as a sort of this bolshy adolescent into the workforce, which then pushes you back into another mode. Every time you've had some free choices, but they're always going to be influenced.
That's good. I like that. Yeah, I think that's a lot of people's view these days, is a kind of constrained free will. Yeah. Well, that is awesome. All right. Well, the next thing is, if somebody could only ever read one book about psychology, what would you recommend? And hopefully not a textbook, but if it must be a textbook, that's okay too.
Ooh, it won't be a textbook, though I love textbooks. Textbooks are very useful, but textbooks are only useful if you're really studying something. It's not what makes you passionate about something. Oh, what would it be? I have to say, I like pop psychology. I don't really know if this counts as a psychology book or not. I like a lot of Malcolm Gladwell's books. Some of his stuff touches on psychology. He's not a psychologist, though. He's very much, he's a journalist. I think for the New York Times, I think
so, or the New Yorker.
But I find his, or the New Yorker, yeah, it might be the New Yorker.
One of those.
It had New York somewhere in it.
Yeah.
I find his stuff very interesting. Would that be my Tipping Point is one that really comes to mind. I love social psychology, the way people work together, groups and influences and stuff like that. And that really touches in on that. So I would definitely recommend that. It's definitely not all encompassing, though. I wonder if I've tried to make this too much of a challenge for myself to think of a book that ties it all together. Maybe that book doesn't exist. But the thing that I love about pop psychology books is that as you read more and more of them, you start to already be able to see where they're going.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can make them a bit predictable, but I actually think from a revision side of things, from really sort of getting into the subject, that's when you start to go, wow, no, I've connected with this now. I'm already formulating the arguments. Are they going to surprise me now? Are they going to give me something new? I'll give one book recommendation that's, I think it would be a hard sell to say it's the best psychology book ever written, but it's a very, very interesting book for me, certainly. And it's called Places of the Heart, which is here. It's Colin Ellard. I'll get it out. One area of psychology that I've really got into, this is after I graduated, is it's environmental psychology. And it's all about the designed places around us. This is not a natural environment that we live in. We've constructed homes. Why do our houses look like they do? Well, because humans made them and wanted them to look like that. So what do they do for our personalities? What do they do for our well-being, our emotional state? What does nature do for us? Why are we drawn to certain natural environments over others? And this book really touches in with that. And he does some research using VR, which is really interesting. He's based in Canada, and in his lab, it's a total virtual reality lab, and he creates environments in the lab and measures like tiny things in people's sweat glands in their fingers, everything. He's measuring these minute details to see how people react to different spaces and environments. And I think he's one of the first to do it in a virtual sense as well. And I think the future is, for better or for worse, taking us into that virtual realm with the metaverse and stuff. And I think his research is going to be pivotal to understand what's, I hesitate to say what's good for us in that world, because I'm not sure that it is necessarily good for us. But maybe more importantly, the question is what's less bad for us.
Yes.
How do we protect ourselves from the metaverse and still flourish? If in 25 years time, all of us work in the metaverse, that's going to be, office spaces are already not our natural environment. A metaverse office is going to be even more weird. How do we protect ourselves from that? What stresses is that putting on us? And his sort of virtual reality research might start to focus some minds on that. So I really recommend that book. It's very specific in terms of the area of psychology. It's not broad in any sense of the imagination. But if you're interested, like me, in sort of how people connect with their environment, it's a go-to read, I think.
That sounds fascinating. That's you said Places of the Heart?
Places of the Heart.
Places of the Heart. I will definitely check that one out. Yeah, and I can also vouch, I like Malcolm Gladwell's work too. That was very influential on me early on in high school, reading his Tipping Point and Outliers.
Yeah.
Those are interesting books. All right, well, I think that's just about it. I really appreciate you coming on, Daniel, and talking with me, answering all my questions. It's been really fun speaking with you.
It's been great. Thank you so much. Thanks for getting in touch. It's been great to chat. I enjoy your channel, and it's been even better actually having a real conversation with each other. So thank you.
Yeah, same here. It's so valuable. And I just encourage everybody, I'll put a link to it in the description and all that, but go check out Psychology Unlocked, learn about psychology. They're very brief, clear, concise, good videos. And yeah. And is there anywhere else that people can find you, or is the channel the place?
So channel's the best place. Yeah, there's the website as well, which is psychologyunlocked.com. And if for some strange reason that you're interested in my my actual work, which is the travel writing and entertainment stuff, then my website is danieledwarduk.com.
Okay.
You can see what else I get up to when I'm not YouTubing.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll check that out as well. Put a link to it. Put the link to that one as well. All right. Well, great talking to you, Daniel. I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Brilliant. You too. Thank you so much. Speak soon.
Talk to you soon. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of the Sense of Mind podcast. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you use. Also, consider giving this show a 5-star rating on that podcast platform. As always, this channel is brought to you by the Diamond Mind Foundation. This episode was written and produced by me, Andrew Cooper Sansone. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.